Good afternoon. My name is Board Member Ragland, and I am proud to chair the Audit and Accountability Committee, along with Board Member Carol Beckerly. I'd like to call this meeting to order today at 3:35 p.m. Madam Auditor, would you please call the roll? All right, I think you've got to unmute, Madam Auditor. You're muted.
How's this? Mr.
There we go. Here.
Ms. Beckerly.
Here.
Mr. Grant.
Here.
Mr. Vajon.
Here.
Ms. Adair. Mr. Jordan.
Here.
And Mr. Daniel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. And as you may have heard, we have just added another member to this wonderful committee. I'd like for the entire committee and the general public to welcome Mr. Cullen Daniel, the newest member of the Audit and Accountability Committee. Mr. Daniel, thank you for joining us. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, it is an honor and both a privilege to be part of this board. Sometimes one wonders as a CPA what you can do for the community and give back, and this is one of the ways that you can. I think Ms. Smith before gave you bits and pieces of my resume. A lot of my background is in non-for-profit and governmental, but I think I could add a good piece to what you're looking at. In addition to that, I've spent the majority of my life here in Columbus. I was born and raised in Lima, but spent most of my adult life here in Columbus and had two daughters who both graduated through Columbus Public Schools. Here again is an honor and privilege, and I will do my part.
Well, thank you for joining us, sir, and thank you for accepting the call. This has been a long time coming. We've been looking to fill this seat, and I'm glad that we finally landed on what I feel to be a very outstanding candidate in yourself, and it is good to have you here. Any other comments from other committee members? Seeing none, I'd like to go ahead and get started with today's agenda. The minutes for last month's meeting, the April 2021 meeting, were sent to you in advance of this meeting. Are there any questions or concerns regarding the April 2021 committee meeting? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the minutes from the April 2021 meeting of the Audit and Accountability Committee. Madam Auditor, please call the roll. You're on mute.
Learning experience being.
There we go. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant.
Yes.
Mr. Vajon.
Yes.
Mr. Jordan.
Yes.
And okay, because Mr. Daniel wasn't here, I will.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Okay, we have the motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Next, we will go into committee operations. We'll start with the Audit and Accountability Committee Charter Revision. Madam Auditor, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Chair Ragland. Okay, at our April meeting, you received a draft of a committee charter, and that committee charter was one that conformed with what the board is wanting to have all the committee charters look like. And during the April meeting and today's meeting, thank you, there was some communication from different committee members wanting to possibly include some language from the IIA's charter, model charter. So what I did was I combined that language from the IIA's model charter, and I have sent all of you a draft of what that would look like. So with that, I will be happy to open it up to the committee to hear what your preferences are, and I will answer any questions that I can answer.
Thank you. Certainly. Thank you, Madam Auditor. At this time, I'd like to open the floor for the committee to have any questions that you may have generated from the review of this document prior to today's meeting. And then if there needs to be any type of discussion on it, we can go ahead and have that now. I am not necessarily in a rush to get this through today if the committee desires to spend a little bit more time with it. However, I do want to acknowledge Madam Auditor and her work in aligning this with the requests of the committee from last month. And so that is the reason why you're seeing kind of the side-by-side look on what we had before and what we have now, so that the changes can be clearly articulated. So with that, any questions from the floor?
Can we pull it up so that we can see it and we're all looking at the same thing?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what I, of course, can't find for the life of me is I had provided some comments to this. I just had them.
Hopefully, Chair Stephanie and members, you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, great. So just let me know. I'm going to hide the thumbnail, so I'm just going to move down. And the first change that I put in from the model charter is the language that you see in yellow.
Okay. Here's the my take on it. Oh, it looks like you did change some of mine already. Because I had provided.
Yes, Board Member Beckley.
Okay.
Yeah, there were two comments that you provided, and I did change the one from, I believe it said business to district. And then you had also asked about the inclusion of the oversight over the internal auditor. And I also put that language in there. The language from the model charter was a little bit more expansive than what we originally had. So those two suggestions that you made have been incorporated.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So the committee assists the Board of Education. By providing advice and guidance on the adequacy of a district initiatives for values and ethics, governance structure, risk management, internal control framework, oversight of the internal audit activity, external auditors, and other providers of assurance. All right, so this, there's two competing things, and I think that we really are going to need to rely heavily on our committee members who are experts in this field to help guide us a little bit. Because there's one thing, which is the bylaw 0155, and that clearly provides that the role of committees is to be advisory only to the board. So that makes sense. And that reference to that is a good foundational preface to all of this. And then the question I guess we have then is, if the role of the committee is to provide guidance and oversight of our governance, risk management, and internal control practices, that makes sense, right? Because that's what the every audit committee should, every audit office of audit should be doing, that internal audit. On the adequacy of district initiatives for values and ethics, I mean, I think that's another good thing. It sort of gets to the other staffing issue, because I'm not sure that Carolyn and her team are able to get to some of this stuff that we're saying is the role of the committee. But I'm assuming that that sort of language is standard operating procedure and function for what audit committees in general should be, internal offices of audit should be doing. And I guess I would like some input from our community members to give us some guidance about that. And then the other thing that I think we need to kind of talk about again is what we mean by external auditors. Do external auditors engaged and retained by the Office of Internal Audit or beyond that? Because then we're going to get back into that other issue that we've talked about on and off for the past year. Am I making myself clear? Or should I say it again? I mean, I guess the bottom line is, do these seem like generally the right sorts of things that should be the purview of the Office of Internal Audit?
And Mr. Vadjon has his hand raised.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Thank you. Yeah, so the committee probably, like the members that raised some of the questions that, well, I think I was one of them. And as I read and I apologize, I missed the meeting where the charter was presented, but when I read that, it just seemed to deviate from what I have been accustomed to seeing in audit committee charters. And this is, again, please, everybody in the committee understand that this is more, again, on the corporate enterprise side. So it's not that this is exactly what the committee has to do and the school board has to do respective to like internal audit and the audit accountability committee for the school district. But that just stood out. And that's where I asked, the IA thought was one of the organizations that publishes a model charter that would have at least the most common components that we would find in an audit committee. And that's kind of where for my advice was, hey, let's compare that and make sure that we have appropriate kind of alignment, or at least that, it appears to capture what most generally we would have from an audit committee. Because the draft charter, as we looked at, that was proposed in the prior meeting, was fairly narrowing down the committee's focus and activity, right, to oversight of internal audit, which kind of looking at the committee and kind of leveraging, the school district or leveraging the committee, generally that's where we'd want more, broader alignments. So, and generally what you would see from, or I would expect to see from an audit committee would be oversight over financial reporting, things like internal controls, compliance, and external audits. Now, how that is tackled, I guess, by the school district, considering, right, how the school district is structured and what's best for the school district, I think that there's some flexibility in that to what the board is looking for to kind of get out of the internal audit function. And I think Ms. Beckerly is correct that is kind of the other consideration, that if we, well, one thing is just because we're, tasking the committee to have, authority and oversight over a specific subject matter, I wouldn't necessarily consider that immediately to be an assignment for the internal audit department to do or execute. But the key is that the committee has the authority to raise questions and ask questions in these subject matters. And oftentimes that could also entail that the member of the district's administration would come also present relevant items, right? Which that would be kind of the one question that we'd want to keep in mind, that if we narrow down the charter's focus on oversight over internal audit, would the committee have kind of the authority to also ask the school district administration specific questions and bring, ask them to come and present items? I'm certain that the district, the district administration, they wouldn't mind that they would come and present, but just from kind of aligning what's in the charter and what's the authority of the committee and the responsibility of the committee, we'd want to make sure those things are aligned. So expectation to actual working of the committee, if that makes sense.
Right. We want to make sure that whatever the committee is asked to do, they have the authority in their organizing documents to do it.
Yes.
Now, just for ease of reference, the red text that's crossed out is what was in the original. And that was up from what was in the previous document, the previous charter. So,
And if I can add a little bit, yeah, the previous charter was based on the IIA's model charter, I believe from 2013 or maybe even a little earlier. And in 2017, a revised IIA model audit committee charter was published. So that is what I am basing this on. So you will see some strike throughs from the previous audit committee charter trying to align this draft with the most recent IIA model charter. And then Vice Chair Beckley, regarding your question about external auditors, right now the state law requires that we have our audit done by the auditor of state, so that is who our external auditors are. But if for any point in the future we were to actually be able to select another auditor, then that's who the external auditors will be referring to. So once again, the Audit and Accountability Committee certainly has a very active role in the Office of Internal Audit and what we do. But this charter also gives them the authority to provide oversight and advice over other risk control and governance structures of the organization, such as your external audit report, such as your risk management structure, such as your internal control framework. What we do is we go out and we audit those areas to provide the board assurance that these audits are operating as intended. But as far as the external audits and the financial reports, that would primarily reside with the treasurer's office. So
Right.
that's why, his office is actually the key partner in that. Internal audit, we just kind of facilitate. And as we are made aware of any findings and recommendations, we go out to see if they have been implemented in order to address the issues that were raised by the external auditors.
right. So this paragraph here doesn't talk about oversight over the financial per se.
Right, that's further down. This just gives the purpose.
Okay. And then so external auditors in this context is referring to the auditors of our financial statements or our financial auditors, it's not referring to the PDK audit.
Correct.
Okay, that's or the Council of Great City Schools audit or any of those other audits. All right, that was the one clarifying thing that I wanted to make sure there. I think that the other point, I think this language is good and probably for a lot of the reasons that Mr. Vajon just mentioned, but understanding that just because that's in our purview, I'm not so sure a lot of this is happening at the moment. Would that be accurate, Carolyn? Am I like district initiatives for values and ethics?
We do have a report that comes from last year was the first year when we had the legal counsel come in and give a report to the committee. And then also we give a report, just an overview of things that come through on the hotline. But there probably is some additional information that the committee might want in this area.
Right.
And this would give you the authority to ask for that information.
Right. Because in internal control framework too, I mean, that seems like something that we might need to be working on, unless I'm missing something. But otherwise, I mean, I think I'm okay with this language as it's written. It's broad, but I think it's important. It's thorough.
Okay.
Any other reactions?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm just curious to know, Mr. Daniel, you're coming from the nonprofit world. Does this seem? We'll put you on the hot spot your first meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
No problem.
Give
The language looks appropriate to me. It has to be broad enough, but kind of concise. And I see that within there. A lot of it is just like chairperson thing that of that nature, how they direct the committee. I don't see anything there unusual. I don't see really anything left out. I'd rather be a little broader than narrower. And that's what I'm seeing in this standpoint. And even sometimes we can't get lost in language like internal control framework. One has to exist if you got an internal control department, and then just trying to follow through that. I don't see any problem with it. I was looking at what it was before, and if anything, it looks like it's broadened it out. So it appears to be appropriate to me.
Okay, thanks.
I guess my reaction, it appears that we're still missing, unless I'm got the wrong version, the oversight of the financial statements and other compliance matters. Again, unless I'm missing the right version here, I think I have both of them up looking at them. And then the way I read this too, it looks like the committee is only in an advisory capacity, making recommendations. So there's no responsibility lies within this committee. It's only be reviewing and making recommendations to the board.
Correct.
Is that intended?
Well, that's intended based on the policy that creates committees. And it seems to me like it's worth considering whether the audit committee is different from, say, the Culture and Climate Committee or the Public Engagement Committee, because it sort of has this structural function that's not, it's not a committee that's made at the, I keep coming up with the wrong word, at the discretion of the board. It's a committee that sort of needs to exist.
So anything that's approved here, say reports, financial statements, any items goes up to the board for their approval?
Yeah, we bring it to the board and say, we're referring it from committee essentially and recommending that you approve it. We're not the final approval, at least as it's set up now.
Okay, that is, I agree with Vaj on it. That's quite a bit different than the corporate side, even some of my other not-for-profit involvement. Because typically the authority lies with the committee, and the committee typically has to report out to the overall board of trustees or board of directors.
Well, how is that different from what we're doing?
Well, we're making recommendations to the board, so the board approves, as opposed to we would approve it here and just have it informed to the board. That
Communicate to the board, not ask them to vote on it.
right.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Yeah.
There's actually two things that are happening here. With the reports that my department brings, and with the Auditor of State Financials, once this committee votes, that is pretty much the approval. I just inform the board as far as, this is what happened at the Audit and Accountability Committee. Now, for my work plan, that does go through the process where you would approve, you would recommend that it goes forward to the board. And then I actually have legislation that I take to the board for them to adopt the work plan. So there are two tracks that are going here, and maybe that's a problem, but that's how we've been functioning, at least since I've been here and probably before my arrival.
But is it accurate to say, Carolyn, that we don't, your group doesn't audit the financials, the Auditor of State audits them, correct?
Correct. And then they have a meeting with the committee.
Right.
And then once they have that meeting, we wait until they give us the okay to discuss that report in public. So there really is no vote from the board to accept the financials. Most of the heavy lift of the financials is done in this committee.
But it's really done by the Auditor of State, right?
Well, they do the work, but the committee will ask questions about it, and they'll come and they'll have that exit conference with the committee.
Got it.
Yeah, it's just in the corporate side, KPMG performs our audit. They bring the audit reports to the audit committee, although they're signed and audited by KPMG. Our committee still approves the financial statements and then makes it informed to the board that the financials were approved in committee.
Yeah, I think that is different here. And it certainly has been different in practice.
Actually, to me, it sounds like it's fairly closely aligned, right? So if even in a corporate world, an external auditor such as KPMG performs the financial statement audit, presents the results to to the audit committee of that corporate entity. That's fairly similar to what we do here. I think it probably internal audit is represented in some of those meetings. However, internal audit is not necessarily generally doing anything related to the financial statement audit, right? Mr. Jordan?
Correct.
That's correct.
I don't know if that's in the corporate world.
From my understanding, that's how the process that I've been exposed to, that's how it works. It's differently when it comes to things like Sarbanes-Oxley and compliance around those items. Then there is, right, in auditing internal controls and all of the related items to that. There's generally an internal and an external audit. Internal audit as representing management, and then also there's an external audit firm usually, right, performing their own assessment. So an audit. I think that would be the primary difference. But from a financial statement audit, it seems this is fairly closely aligned to what the board is currently doing. It is just, instead of using an audit, an audit firm, the auditor of state performing the financial statement audit.
Yeah, that's how it seems to me.
Correct. And that's how it's been.
There are certainly some decisions being made by the committee that are, being made at the committee level and not going up to the board. When the auditor of state comes in and they have findings, there are areas of discussions, those items are being handled by the committee, and sometimes we're actually accepting that at that point, and before the audit gets finalized and even goes up to the committee for the final approval. So certainly, I think the major issue with our committee, Audit and Accountability Committee versus the Audit Committee, is the authority that's been granted to it. And I think that's somewhat of a misnomer there in terms of how much authority does the committee have versus what an Audit Committee typically would have. Because the Audit Committee really is a body normally made up of members of the board, and they make that their final approval.
But I guess, Greg, you're responding to the fact that it doesn't feel advisory to you in the corporate realm. The role of the audit committee.
It just feels like there are items, and I agree with both Tim and Vach on the external auditor, that there are items that we approve reports and activities. I guess I didn't realize that we're approving them only to be submitted up to the board for additional approval.
I mean, by and large, it would be probably fairly unusual for there to be pushback at the board level, because in theory we're doing, the legwork of the board, but in theory it could be.
Can I just briefly go over how I have been handling the reports that my department issues? So my department will come in, and you've been through the process before. We'll present the reports to you, to the committee. If the committee has any questions about something that's in the report, or they want something that they disagree with, it doesn't go to anyone at that point in time. We go back, we address the committee's concerns, then we'll bring it back to the committee at another meeting, and then we take the vote. And at that point, it really is approved. I have not, since I've been here, have I taken anything to the board for approval. When I go to the board, is to give an update of what happened during the Audit and Accountability Committee. Here's a summary. It's not something that's voted on by the board. Now, the work plan is treated differently. The work plan, I view that as something that you will recommend that the board adopt. And then I take legislation to the board. It's on the agenda. So when the board does their consent agenda, that legislation is back there for their approval. And like I said, we're kind of going down both roads. And rightfully or wrongfully, that's how it's been since I've been here and prior to my arrival. So I just continue to do what was in place when I came.
So it sounds like there's 3 tracks then. There's the external auditor track. There's the board that we present the plan and they adopt the plan. And then there's the reports that we just present and they don't vote on.
The external actually goes along the plan of the internal audit. When the auditor of state comes and meets with the committee, once again, typically at the next meeting, when I'm allowed to talk about the report, we'll just do an overview. You know, a report was released, there were no findings, or there were some findings, and here's what's going to happen. So once again, it's not something that is voted on by the board for release.
And neither are the other reports, just the audit plan. Is that correct?
The work plan.
The work plan, correct.
And this is consistent with the operations of the other committees as well. FAC does pretty much the same process. And having served on the policy committee prior to joining the board, policy pretty much follows the same process. However, they submit more legislation than we do when there are policy changes that are needed. Those are submitted and then officially voted on by the board. Sometimes there are first readings and second readings for those policies, and that's by bylaw. However, this practice here that is mentioned is consistent. I guess my question to the committee members is, do you feel like there should be stronger language within this purpose clause here that details more of what we believe we want to see, or are you fine with us, carrying on with this particular language and moving forward? I think that's really kind of the long and short of it for me. If there's a need for us to add a little bit more in here, I think now's the time to really kind of consider that, and then give Carolyn and her team an opportunity to kind of work that in and then bring it back to us. But is that the will of the committee is my question.
Well, I'm on the same page as Greg was earlier when he said the piece that's missing is the financial reporting assurance. So, and I think that covers both external and internal. We're dealing with the auditor of state right now in terms of the external reporting, but a lot of what Carolyn's area is handling is so that your financial information is accurate. So whether that's your payroll or your purchasing system or whatever, all that rolls up into your financials, which you're making decisions on based on that information. So when we say financial reporting assurance, it's both external and internal. So I think that piece, even though we specifically break out external auditors, I think really if we just did financial reporting assurance, that probably covers, both the external part and the internal part.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Grant. I think it's probably covered then, if we add that at the top, it's probably covered then under section 4, the first bullet point.
Right.
Yep. And you might want to I think there's a space missing between its and stakeholders, unless it's the way mine printed.
And I think Madam Auditor was referencing that a little bit earlier today.
Yeah.
But no, I hear you both saying that we need to move that up into section part 2, section 1 is what I'm hearing. It needs to be articulated there as well.
Okay, so you would like to see that in the purpose clause also?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we can add that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Pending that change, I am fine with the document then as presented with the change, pending change.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Mr. Grant,
Yes, I think that would work. So.
Mr. Vajon.
I think from my standpoint, I'm aligned with both Mr. Grant and Mr. Jordan brought up. I think my only other, I guess maybe question is there going to be an overall, is the legal counsel for the school district going to review this also before it's finalized?
I'm hoping he's on this call. Is he with us or this meeting?
He is, I believe, on the call, and he's heard that request, and we can get that to him.
Yep.
Yes,
You just could.
I joined about 10 minutes ago.
Good afternoon, Mr. Barnes. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Okay, so we have a request from the committee that you would review this document before it is finalized. Could we get an opportunity to maybe have myself, Madam Co-Chair, and Madam Auditor to sit with you, have this review, and then give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down before our next meeting that will occur in September?
Yes, certainly. And I had a chance to look at it briefly right before the meeting, and I do have some questions. One, I think that we have to keep in mind that public boards are far different than corporate boards or even nonprofit boards.
Sure.
And that for a public board, because the board members are elected officials, they really can't delegate authority to committees.
And that was kind of going to be exactly my ask, that the model charter does account for it. And if you look in the preface covers, that it says, hey, based on different legal or regulatory requirements in the jurisdiction, you need to account for that. And that's where I would just ask for your kind of interpretation, whether we are staying within what the regulations right in the law says we can do in the state of Ohio as it pertains to the school district.
Yes, and most models really address corporate boards or private boards.
So I guess, Greg, that explains where your confusion comes from. What do you mean everything we do goes up to the board?
Yeah, and I agree with that, John. I think when you look at the IA's model charter, it does have that call out for there could be exceptions based upon legislation, attorney generals for public.
So, okay. All right. So that's really helpful then, because that's closing that loop. Because what I was thinking about is, well, maybe it should be different, but thank you, James Barnes, for putting that to bed.
Right.
So this is all we can do is advise the board. Is that essentially right?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. So, Mr. Daniel, I did want to allow you to have another opportunity to weigh in if you were okay with the language as presented, and then with the changes that we've made, it seems like I just want to give you another opportunity to speak. If you're okay with it, that's fine.
Yes, I'm okay with it. I was listening to what everyone said, and I guess we're going through just differentiations in different industries. But I think we're very well covered. And then as the legal counsel came in, I knew there was some caveat, whereas elected officials, they can't really give away the responsibility, but then they'll have advisory bodies give them advice and recommendations.
Sure.
So I'm fine with it.
Okay, so I tell you what, here's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and get a meeting set with Mr. Barnes, myself, Madam Co-Chair, and Madam Auditor. And then by September, we will have included the language on the financial reporting within the purpose, and then have a cleaned up document to you before the meeting in September so that we can forward the charter to the Board of Education at that time. Does that sound like a plan for the committee?
Are you not talking about the rest of this document? Because I have some.
Oh, I am sorry, Madam Co-Chair. I did not want to. I thought that Mr. Jordan said that he was fine with the rest of it, but Mr. Jordan said that. I am sorry about that. Please, Madam Co-Chair, you do have the floor, ma'am.
I thought Mr. Jordan was saying he was just fine with the rest of paragraph 1 on purpose, but I don't know. I won't speak for Mr. Jordan.
No, I was fine with the rest of the document, and then pending the one change we suggested to put in the background section.
And it's good that James Barnes is here. We've got too many James. I have way too many Jameses in my life. I have a stepson named.
It's a good, strong name.
Yeah, we never know who we're talking about in my house. Under section 3, authority, duties, the committee shall ABC. It says review and recommend to the board investigations into any matter within the committee's scope of purpose.
I'm trying to catch up to where you are. So we're passing all of this.
No, we're on page 2 of the document,
Roman numeral 3, authority.
section C.
Yeah, so just go down a little bit more. It says the committee shall, oh, that's not there anymore. Oh, yeah, review and.
No, there it is, right there.
Right. See top there, it says review and recommend to the board investigations into any matter within the committee's scope of purpose. It probably should be or purpose, but this is my question about investigations, and maybe we just need to define them. But I, having spent some time in the in-house function in corporations a million trillion years ago, and maybe I'm just too binary in my thinking, but I always think of investigations as the purview of the legal operation, and reviews, audit reviews, as the purview of the audit operation. And I guess I want to tease that out a little bit. And part of it is because in my mind, you want your investigations covered by attorney-client privilege for openers. But also it sort of gets into this bigger issue that Carolyn and I have discussed, and Mr. Vajon and Mr. Jordan and I have discussed about, the role of the audit office department is to be on a cycle where they're periodically on a regular basis checking into all the nooks and crannies of the organization. And it seems to me that we can't free up Carolyn and her team from these sort of putting out fires things, and that are more akin to investigations in a way. So I'd love for us to have a discussion about what is or isn't an investigation, and if some are appropriate to be covered by the audit department, and when they should be handed over to the legal department. Or maybe to James Barnes's point, I have too much of a corporate mindset, and in public bodies such as school boards, it's not, the distinctions aren't the same. Any thoughts, committee members?
I guess like for instance would be your whistleblower policy. If you get, someone says they know of an issue that needs to be investigated, and then Carolyn's committee is the one that does that review. I mean, that's an investigation, but I don't know if it rises to what you're referring to as an investigation.
Can I
Okay.
add something before you guys get deep into this conversation? In the past, how we have operated, if something comes, we monitor the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. So if something comes through that hotline, we'll start the initial review. And sometimes we use the term investigation review interchangeably, and maybe that's not right, but we do.
Yeah.
If it's something in the past that has risen to the level where, there needs to be some type of subpoena power or some type of police involvement, we have worked with inside legal counsel here recently, or we have referred those, or they have just come, or the Auditor of State or the Franklin County prosecutor has come in to complete that side of it. So we do special reviews / investigations, but we do not have subpoena power. I do not have police personnel on my staff, nor would I want that. So when it requires an investigation of that type of nature, then it gets referred out. Either we work in the past with our legal counsel, previously Mr. Braverman, now Mr. Barnes, or the Auditor of State, or in some cases, the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. And sometimes even the local police who has jurisdiction might come in and do something. So to me, sometimes now as far as the attendance situation, that was definitely under the audit committee's purview. the Auditor of State, when they were doing the work, they met with the audit committee periodically to discuss what was going on. When they closed the investigation, they met with audit committee. So often these things are referred out, maybe from my office or from the audit committee. But this is just kind of giving the audit committee the authority to refer refer some type of investigation work to happen. And if the committee decides that it needs to be legal, or if the committee decides some other entity needs to do it, this gives, from my vantage point, this gives you the authority to do that.
Yeah, I guess I understand that. And I'm just wondering if we should have a set of procedures or an understanding, or, I mean, James Barnes, what's your take on this? Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. And because I'm just getting into the discussion, I'm not sure where I'm at. I think the committee has to be careful with investigations, because the committee and even the internal auditor role is not to make findings of illegality or fraud,
Right.
but to assess the risk, and it's exactly as Carolyn mentioned, to make the appropriate referrals, which is what I believe is occurring at the present time.
You're correct.
So, well, maybe this is one we'll add to the list, James Ragland and James Barnes and Carolyn, when we meet, to try to have that. Do we need a board policy to address this? Do we need to change this language a little bit or somehow? I just feel like that language is really broad. And I think that we as an organization need to be really clear about when we hand off and how we hand off, and what the process is.
I don't think that we're going to be able to predetermine every single situation. I think that's why the language is as broad as it is. I think there's an understanding that when it does need to be handed off, there are different entities that the auditor would hand these things off to. Sometimes it requires us to do it with Mr. Barnes' office. Sometimes it requires us to go outside of Columbus City Schools to do that. I'm not sure if every single situation that we may run into, we'd be able to put that into a policy so that it's so clearly defined when it goes to which particular entity.
No, but we should have criteria. I mean, we can't cover all you're absolutely right. We can't cover.
Well, one thought would be, this is the audit committee charter, and then you have the Office of Internal Audit policies and procedures, and certainly Carolyn's team could bring any recommended investigations to the committee for to be directed to the appropriate party to do the investigation. So, for example, if there's something on the hotline, Carolyn's team wouldn't automatically just do the investigation. They'd bring it forth to the committee to recommend, based upon the results of what they saw on the hotline, there needs to be a further investigation. But I think that would be covered more in the P&P of the department.
Department's operational policies.
Right, correct. It's just like she performs an annual risk assessment, they perform the annual plan, staffing. So any request for addition to the plan, because right now the plan contains no investigations, would be brought forth to the committee for, we recommend that we do this. And then the committee could decide, we're going to recommend that Mr. Barnes' department do it, or XYZ, somebody else outside.
So the problem is not necessarily with this language, is to make sure that the operations policies are clear. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that'd be my opinion.
Okay, that's.
I guess sometimes events happen where the best that I can do is to notify the committee that something is happening. A case in point is when we received a a call from uh, a, a partner organization that passes were being distributed that we had paid for, but the passes were not being distributed by our personnel. Someone had gotten hold of the passes that had value and were selling them on like a Craigslist or something. I can't remember the specifics of that.
Sure.
So sometimes I just don't want to, I just want to you all to keep in mind that sometimes there's just not going to be time to come and go through a process where I have to come to the committee.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, as we're going through this, I just want to, ask you to keep that in mind. So as we do have policies and procedures, and we do actually have our own internal audit charter, which definitely needs to be updated. So as we're going through that process, we will keep this conversation in mind.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, no, 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 no. If I suggested anything like that, that was not what I meant at all. No, that's the sort of thing you hand off to legal immediately.
Well, that was the situation where the auditor of state basically took it over because they were aware of it, and there was the person was arrested, and so sometimes things happen. Other entities become aware of it, and we cannot tell the Columbus Police or the Whitehall Police or some other entity that they cannot go in and do the investigation, even though it might be involving our staff or our assets.
Oh, yeah,
That's what I'm
absolutely.
saying.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, I agree.
And
I-
I'm sorry, to Ms. Smith's point, we need to be careful that the committee doesn't turn into a pseudo internal auditor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, 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 I agree. If anything, if we said anything like that, we didn't mean, or I didn't mean anyway, that should be the case.
I didn't think that's what you were saying.
Yeah. The second one, D, resolve disagreements between the administration and the external auditors. That's the role of the committee to do that? That had me confused too. Like, so if the auditor of state says, this is a problem, and the administration says, no, it's not, it's our role to, does that come up, or is that, I mean, do we have the capacity to resolve that? I mean, we can try. We can smooth it over. I just don't know that the committee has the authority, maybe is the right word.
I was going to let the committee members address that.
Yeah, I guess the question is resolved. I mean, we may make recommendations. I mean, for instance, the auditor of state has a finding and management doesn't necessarily agree with the finding. Somebody has to make a decision about whether or not what our response is going to be, needs to be. So,
Maybe should the word be
I
addressed?
don't know if it's a resolved issue or if it's a recommendation issue between disagreements between administration and external auditors.
Okay, so maybe the committee shall make recommendations.
And I've not ran into this here at the district, but it also could possibly, and those of you who have recent financial accounting experience can let me know, could it also involve some type of adjusting entry that that the auditor of state is saying needs to be made, and the administration might disagree, or something along those lines that might come to the committee for like I say, it has not happened since I've been here, so I don't really have a lot of real life experiences to provide to you.
Right, but this language came out of the sort of standard recommended language from the IAA.
Correct. And
So-
it could definitely be changed if the committee wants to change it.
So I think at a minimum, make recommendations. I mean, I could see it coming up in that, they decided not to make an issue of it, but
I do like the term address as opposed to resolve,
okay.
because resolve almost sounds like we're able to,
Decree.
right, yeah, like we can declare the word of the auditor state null and void, and I don't like that. I think address would probably be a little better. Okay, here's what we can do. We'll add that to our little list that we're developing here, and see if we can't come up with something better.
Yes, I can make that change.
Below it just says advise, and maybe that's what we ought to just say, because we're advising anyway. Just
Okay,
resolve,
good.
advise.
Regarding, advise regarding, all right, I like that. I had, James, I'm Raglan, I'm gonna drive you crazy, but the next one I have a question about too, select independent counsel, accountants or other professionals to advise. I'm guessing James Barnes has an opinion about that.
Well, yes. Well, one, the board, the treasurer, and the internal auditor already have counsel.
That's what I thought.
And I'm not sure what that was intended to
Accomplish.
Well, I guess here for me on the outset, and not to besmirch you, Mr. Barnes, but what if the investigation does involve your office? And that was my thinking regarding why that would happen. It would be appropriate for the committee to serve as an independent source to go and find an outside counsel. If there was something that was happening within your office that needs to be uncovered, we'd have to go to an independent counsel. It would not be your function to hire the independent counsel that's going to investigate your office. And that was just my thinking when I first read this, that's what it was all about. Now, I may be completely wrong on that. However, that's kind of what I thought it meant when I first looked at it. And if I'm wrong, you can please, all of you can tell me you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, does anybody else think it odd that the audit committee would be selecting independent counsel and even in a corporate situation? I thought that was kind of weird.
Well, I didn't even look at the independent counsel. I thought it was more referring to like when we selected Snyder Downs to do the other. I'm sorry, what the category that they did a
The audit.
specific review of. It was more,
It did perform technology controls or IT general controls assessment.
So maybe we call it select consultants or experts consultants.
Well, I think this again goes to the committee's authority. I don't believe the committee even has authority to make those selections.
Or all we could do is make recommendations, right?
Yes.
I think it should be advised and not so actually.
Yeah, it's probably recommend to the board, because I do think there could be something that comes up in committee that we feel needs an investigation. We want to make a recommendation to the board as to how we think it should be handled.
Yes, and to board member Ragland's point, and forbid there's ever a need to investigate my office. But the appointment of outside counsel, because I call it outside counsel rather than independent counsel, those should always flow through the general counsel's office, even if a department or the board is seeking outside counsel.
Right.
If there is an investigation of or a need to investigate the general counsel office, that has to be a board decision.
Right. All right, so I think what we're saying is this language probably should be adjusted to reflect making recommendations to engage consultants, really, or with certain expertise or something. And so we're not confused about it suggesting legal counsel. Does that sound right? Anybody disagree? Okay, I think
I
we're,
think from my advice would be, as we look at kind of the structure, a review and recommends, that's under bullet point C. And as we talked about investigation, that actually, I read that as talking about review. So meaning that there's some examination was performed and then recommend to the board investigations. That doesn't mean that the committee would be doing any investigation, nor that internal audit would be, but providing recommendation to the board that investigation is performed. That could be similar language or something similar to that, to be
okay,
recommend to the board, right? Hiring independent consultants, accountants for other professionals, right?
yes, good
Or
one.
things like that. So
Okay,
Now-
well, if the
and now
committee's
I-
fine, I will come up with some language to bring back to our meeting with Carol,
All right,
Hart and James Ragland, and hopefully, once it comes back to you, it checks off all boxes.
the, just, here's an aside that should humble us all. I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Ilya this week and finding out that English is not really his first language. And he's correcting us on, maybe it was your third, was it your third language?
third, yes.
So when he's fixing up our language, we should all feel very humbled.
Yes. And a review is a formal assessment or examination, something with possibility, intention, instituting change if necessary. So when in doubt, the dictionary is my go-to.
Our friend. Okay, so review makes sense. All right, I think I'm done with this section, so I won't bother you any longer.
Can I keep going to the next section?
I think I that might be all I had.
Okay.
I want you to be sure, Madam Co-Chair.
Yes, I'm going slow. Just kind of let me know.
I think you're making fun of me.
No,
Chip.
ma'am, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We almost closed this thing out without giving you full time to speak your piece here. I don't want to do that again.
Section 7.
Okay.
And I need to think this through, and James Barnes, you can help. I just want to make sure we've reserved the right to meet in executive session if we need to talk about something that's confidential, and we've done that.
Mhm.
And then we don't need to talk about this anymore, but let's just put a pin in making sure there's some language in here, and I have to go back and look at it again. I think Ilya brought it up, and I didn't go back and look again after we spoke. But so that's just a pin in that one too, to make sure that we have incorporated the procedures of, or the rules that guide
Oh, okay. I see what you're at.
executive session in the board proper, that also guide executive session with the committees. But that's all I got. All right.
I can make these changes, and when the chair and the vice chair and legal counsel and I meet, hopefully I'll be bringing back something that's much more closer to possibly be the final in September.
All righty.
All right. Any other unreadiness from other committee members? All right, seeing none.
Thank you,
Uh,
everyone, for indulging me.
Yes, no. Thank you. Thank you for keeping us on our toes on this. Next, we're going to go to item 2 on the agenda, Office of Internal Audit Report. We'll start with the OIA Table of Organization chart. Madam Co-Chair, we're going to turn it back over to you. You have the floor, ma'am.
I have the floor?
No, Madam Auditor,
Okay.
I was giving you the authority to do the organizational chart, Carol. That was not what I intended. I am sorry about that. Madam Auditor, you have the floor. Excuse
Way
me.
over my head.
Okay, great. Let me just try one thing here. Okay, I think I have this figured out now. I'm not on mute, so great. Okay. Over the course of a year or so, I have discussed various OIA staffing needs, primarily the addition of an IT auditor and other staff. I have shared a proposed staffing budget that would allow the Office of Internal Audit to audit all high-risk items and to be able to perform follow-up activities more timely and provide consulting and advisory services in an effort to reduce those drivers that are keeping audit units at high for sustained periods of time. The proposed increase, in my opinion, still falls short of being able to cycle through every identified audit unit of the district. Providing the board and senior management assurance that each department or function is operating as intended and in alignment with the board's goals and guardrails is instrumental in us achieving our mission. I have prepared 3 scenarios and we'll go through them succinctly, so don't gasp when I say 3 scenarios for the committee to consider. Each will allow more audit coverage than currently possible. But before we get into those 3 scenarios that Mr. O'Connor is going to go over, I want to go over a few assumptions that I have made in coming up with the ability to be able to perform risk-based cycle audits. The first assumption is, let's see if I can get this to move down. Here we go. The first assumption is that the risk-based cycle audits will begin in FY23. The high-risk units that have been currently identified will decrease due to the Office of Internal Audit being able to spend a great deal of effort to perform follow-up engagements and to be able to close open issues. Just keep in mind that the assumption is our best estimate based on how things stand right now. So if we have some key personnel leave the district between now and next year, that could impact the estimate that we still might have 13 high-risk items. A lot of the areas that we have gone into, and we have made recommendations that you need to have policy and procedural manuals that are that have proper controls in place. Well, they have created those policies and those procedures. We just have to go in and be able to test that they are effective. So I believe by doing this follow-up work, you will see some decreases from the high-risk items that we discussed previously. The second assumption is that the high-risk drivers, once again, that dealt with design and effectiveness will be able to test, and we will be able to determine that, okay, the design is effective and the function has implemented the design appropriately, and now the function and the control is effective. The third assumption is that OIA will work with departments that have been reviewed by outside entities, such as the Council of Great City Schools, and we'll be able to assist those departments in addressing those issues. And once again, you will see a decrease in the high-risk audit universe. What comes to mind is the HR department and transportation. The fourth assumption is that the addition of the senior IT and senior risk and compliance position will allow current internal audit staff to spend more time performing, once again, follow-up engagements and closing open issues. And the final assumption is not a prediction of future outcomes, but in the past, the Office of Internal Audit Activity has returned approximately $6 million back to the district over the existence of the department. And these funds have been able to be used to benefit our students. So I cannot promise that you'll see those type of returns going forward, but in the past, we have had a significant impact as far as being able to return funds back to the district. And these are hard dollars. These efforts will allow the Office of Internal Audit to start risk-based cycles with 13 high-risk units. All of the high-risk units will be audited every year, moderates every other year or every 3 years, and then Lowe's every 4 years. I just could not see any way to get it down to a cycle of every 3 years. So I'm proposing a possible cycle of every 4 years. So before I turn it over to Mr. O'Connor, is there any questions on that information?
Yeah, I have a few. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So when you say that one of the assumptions is that you'll be able to commence risk-based cycle audits in 2023, with high risks being every year, moderate risk being every other or 3 years, and low risk being every 4 years. Is that based on your current staffing or on your proposed staffing?
Proposed staffing.
So even with the proposed staffing, that's what your workforce level projections, or your workforce will accommodate.
Yeah, we have 3 different scenarios to kind of show you how we think we can pull this off.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was the unfortunate reality. And then the thing about the 6 million back is your theory that the more auditors, the more revenue you're going to generate?
No, we've been able to, when we're able to really get in and to dig into a department, we might notice something that the department didn't submit reimbursement for, or we might notice something that some reconciliation wasn't done in a timely manner, and once it's done, we have identified, oh, well, you know, we're due some funds back here, and we have worked with the departments to capture those funds. So that's where over the course of, like I said, the history of the department, we've been able to generate those types of funds coming back into the district. So
Sure.
like I said, I can't promise that going forward, you're going to see that, but as we have time to really dig in, you know, we've been able to see, oh, okay, we need to really start going after these dollars more aggressively, or we need to fill out this paperwork to start getting to fill out this paperwork to earn or to get these type of grant funds back.
Okay.
So that's what I'm talking about. And the biggest chunk of that was with the E-rate program.
Got it.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, I don't have my full screen, so I can't see any of the other committee members. Okay, well, with that, I will turn it over to Mr. O'Connor to go over the how that we propose to be able to do this.
Can everybody see that spreadsheet? Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, Mr. Daniel. Welcome to the committee. I'd like to go over a couple of things to help you understand how we arrived at our numbers for the staffing plan. And Ms. Beckerly, just to also add that as there's more auditors reviewing processes, the processes can become more efficient. So while it might not be a monetary value, that should allow people to spend more time, like a principal, if he's following up on work orders or things like that, more time on the educational piece.
Absolutely.
All righty. So you can stop me at any time if you have questions on what I'm going over. The first thing I'm going to cover is level of effort. So we divided the audits, all the audits, into the 4 tiers. And I think you mentioned those tiers. We have high risk, moderate high risk, which is the top half of the moderate group, and moderate low risk, which is the other half, and low risk. And since not all audit universe items within a tier require the same level of effort, these tiers were subdivided into 3 categories. And just for an example, food service and succession planning are both classified as high risk. The number of hours needed to audit food service would be more than succession planning. So we assigned each audit universe item a tier category. And I included just a high risk here just to give you an example of what we did. So if you go about the 5th line down, you'll see food service. And again, these are all high risks, so at the current time, so they will be done every year. And if you go to the far right, you can see 1A would be the tier. And that would be the top one, the most resources would go to that one. 3 lines below, you would see succession planning. And if you go all the way to the right, you would see 1C. So that would have the fewest in tier 1, the fewest hours allotted to that. And I'm not going to get into the options just yet. I'm going to cover those hours here in a minute. But that just gives you an example of what we did for each one of the groups. So these tier categories were then used to allocate hours for each audit, depending on the various options we used. This was used to project the amount of hours needed to audit that audit universe item. And again, it's different for each option. So just to give you an example of how the allocation differed by option, if you selected option A, which would require the most amount of audit work, the categories are A, B, and C there. You would see 750 hours will be spent on like a food service audit. And for a succession planning, you would have 300 hours. And again, that's give or take depending on the scope of the audit. If you went with option B's plan, you would see 650 for the food service and 200 for the succession planning. And then if you went with option C, you would have 500 and then 100 for succession planning. So it gives you an idea of how we allocated the hours across the spectrum. Then we multiplied the allotted hours by that grouping by the number of audits in the category and grouped them by tier and reported them by option in the below table to arrive at the audit hours needed to meet expectation. So for tier 1, you can see option A would be 7,000 hours. And how we got to that is if you went back and remember, category A for tier 1 was 750 hours. There were 6 audits listed as 1A. And when you multiply those two, you have 4,500 hours needed to accomplish that task. Category B was 500 hours. There were 2 audits in that tier and category. That would be 1,000 hours. And then option A, category C would be 300 hours. There were 5 audits in that, and that's 1,500 hours. So when you add the 4,500, the 1,000 and the 1,500, you come up with the 7,000. And we did that for each category within each tier and then totaled them and reported them here. So if you, and I'm going to go over the options in just a minute, but if you went with option A, we would need 10,103 audit hours to accomplish the expectations that go with option A. So now to give you an example of what the options are. Option A.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, I was going to pause for that. Thank you, Ms. Beckley.
Just a little to that first, the 3 tiers and the options. Yes.
Yes.
So that's 750. Which one? I assume 750 is what it's going to take to resolve the issue entirely, and 650 is if we don't have enough staffing, we come closer. Is that how that works?
750 would be a more comprehensive audit. So we would schedule that. The 650 would be audit risk drivers and then some type of proactive work on the audit group. And then option C would just be basically risk drivers that we know about going in and doing that work.
Okay, so there's scope.
Correct, yes.
Got it, all right.
And
Kevin, my question was, just remind me again between the various options, what the cycle times, proposed cycle times were?
so for high risk, it's every year. For the moderate risk at the top end of the scale, it is every other year. For the moderate on the lower end of that scale, and that is if it's scored 2.5 to 2.9, those will be every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's a low risk, it will be every 4 years.
Okay, but in all those cases, you're still saying you like to review high risk every year.
Correct, yes.
And then the only difference is the scope of your review. If you're doing a C review or an A review.
Well, an A, B, or a C would all the A's would have the same scope.
Right, but so like, The cycle's not going to change. It's just the depth of the audit.
Correct. Absolutely, yes.
Got
Yeah.
it.
And my only question, I'm not saying you should change it. Every year for high just seems extensive to me, but you folks would know better. I thought you might be like every 2 years for high or something like that.
And what happens right now is we go in to do high-risk audits. We don't have enough resources to look at all the audit risk drivers that are present right now, given the hours we have currently. So if we expand to one of these other models like option A, we may be able to do a comprehensive because we're doing some proactive work and we're able to eliminate some of those risk drivers before they even become risk drivers.
Okay.
So then at that point, maybe it could be on a cycle. But as of right now, that's not a luxury we currently have. But as I go through these options, I think it'll become apparent exactly the scope of each one of these plans. And again, please stop me if you have questions.
Are you saying if you, based on the results, you may have to amend the cycle, or you may amend the cycle for instance, succession planning? If you find that you're actually have things in place so that, you're replacing employees on a timely basis and you have things in place that will change that from being a high risk or go to a lower risk or whatever.
That's correct. Okay, so option A would involve audit staff performing audits of audit universe items relating to known risk drivers and multiple proactive reviews of other areas for governance, compliance, control, or risk. That would enable OIA to scope audit jobs to be more comprehensive in nature and hopefully identify things before they become problems. An example of the value that these type of audits can bring can be demonstrated in a recent audit where during our proactive review of the governance area, we found an Ohio Revised Code section enabling school districts to file for a rebate of the taxes paid on motor fuel purchases. And these rebates expired after 365 days. So this was not a risk driver, and it was unknown by staff in the area being audited. Once identified by OIA, the district was able to immediately file for rebates, which brought in $276,419 to the district. During our reconciliation of Ohio Department of Taxation rebate checks mailed to the district compared to the revenue received by the district, we found there was $111,382 in checks that were voided because they were never cashed. They became stale dated. These voided checks can be reissued for up to 1 year after issuance, and we were able to have the district request their reissuance. So this part of the audit enabled the district to recover $387,801 by identifying an item during a proactive governance review. This would not have been discovered during audits in which we're only looking at risk drivers. Also, it demonstrates that we are not the experts in these areas we audit. Our risk is generated from discussion with management staff and other reports and data we review. So if an issue does not come up, as this one did not, then it festers and does not get addressed timely. So that's the beauty of going in and doing some of this proactive work. And again, governance is so important. That's normally what we would start with if we did the proactive. So that's option A. Option B would involve audit staff performing audits of audit universe items known and known risk drivers. And in this option, we would cycle the proactive reviews. So it's possible one cycle we would do governance, the next cycle we would do compliance, then come in and do control, etc. So the value of this type of audit will be similar to the example described above. It's just the rebate issue might not have been discovered for a few audit cycles. And then finally, with option C, this would involve audit staff performing audits of audit universe items relating only to known risk drivers. So some examples of risk drivers, if you're curious, is, and I stripped out the department specific information because I didn't want to take any shots at anybody. But if somebody didn't have a perpetual inventory, if they didn't have a procedure manual, if they had multiple manual systems where hand calculations had to be made, those are risk drivers that we would have to apply different audit procedures to ensure that the controls are working effectively. So again, with this type of audit, could enable things identified during the above noted proactive governance review to continue unidentified for an unknown period of time, because we wouldn't have the resources to get in there and do any type of proactive work. Any questions on those? And this is, again, just that same chart. But then I did add a staffing grid to the bottom of that, what it would take. So what we did is we took the 10,103 and we subtracted the hours that are allotted from the current staff, and the remaining number of hours we divided by 1394, which is what we would equate the productivity of a new person coming in. And that was recorded in the additional audit staff needed. So we have 3 leadership, we have 3 specialty staff, current audit staff, 4, and then additional audit staff needed would be 5 to go with 15 if you wanted to go with option A. Now, the numbers in parentheses, the 3 in leadership is what we have currently in internal audit. The +1 is a staff person that's slotted to be hired this fiscal year. So current audit staff, we have, again, 3 + 1 to be hired this year. So then option B would have the 334. Where it differs is because the number of hours for that are reduced, the total staff needed would be 3 additional for 13 total. And then option C, it would be 2 additional audit staff needed, which would be 12. And then that last line is total payroll cost for the indicated staff. So option C for 12 people, that's what it would cost, salary and benefits. For 13, there's that total, and for 15, there's that total. And because the way the cycling worked, and it was spread out pretty evenly, I did include an appendix here that you can see how consistent the hours remained for each option. They changed a little bit, but not much. So that's why I think that staffing, one of those staffing models would work. I'll be glad to take any questions anybody may have.
What's the marginal additional cost?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What's the additional cost? I mean, you're showing total payroll. That's what current staff plus your proposed increase.
Correct. Our current staffing is 731,117.
Okay. So all 3 of these assume that increase in staff.
Correct.
And I mean, the thing that I think, can I say in layman's term what I think I'm hearing, and what bothers me when I think about the current, I mean, the way I describe it in my simplistic way of thinking is that you guys are all just treading water in terms of focusing on the risk areas and not being able to get into a regular cycle of checking out all the nooks and crannies of the organization on a regular basis. So I think to your point, we're flying blind in certain areas because we're not having any periodic review of how they're functioning and their compliance. And I mean,
That's correct. And as you bring new people into the organization, and I think that's what happened with that rebate, we had some new people come in. Well, they weren't aware of the procedures and what was happening, and the ball was just dropped. But because there wasn't any type of cycled review, it went on for a few years before we even found it.
right.
So I think you're absolutely right.
If I could just add, and this also does not include that there's an entire separate risk assessment for the IT area that you all will be seeing in August, but they showed us a draft, and it also takes the same approach of being able to cycle through I think they're recommending every 3 years. So this does not include, or Kevin, correct me, this does not include the IT jobs.
That's correct.
And then another thing is right now we could not absorb, a big influx of staff right away. So it would have to be built up. We will be bringing people on gradually, but this is what it really would take to cycle through. And almost like Kevin said, we were not expecting to be able to return almost $400,000 back to the district by doing that engagement, but we were able to, and it was, and Vice Chair Beckerly, you are correct. It would be nice to be able to go out at least on a cycle basis and see what else is happening and what other types of possibly refunds that could come back to the district, and what other type of efficiencies could be gained through the audit recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, while it's nice to be able to say, oh, we found $400,000 or $6 million over a several years period, from where I'm sitting, the benefit is that's just an extra little perk. I mean, really, what we need to know, and as a member of the board, I would want to be able to sleep more comfortably knowing that we are periodically running through the whole organization and making sure, because, for example, in addition to scaring up those rebates that they didn't know about, what you really found is that there's not a procedure and a manual that, someone can rely on. And that's really the more important thing. I think Kevin's point about we're run more efficiently is true. And the organization, I mean, it's a cultural thing too. If everyone expects to get looked at every 3 years, they're not going to let things slip because they know that, they're going to be held accountable. I mean, so all of it seems to me a critical pivot. That's the popular word of the day, but a critical role of your office, Carolyn, that you're not able to get to based on how we currently have it, or based on the current situation or condition that you're presented with. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me is there some, and this could be a both and, but if we look at these high risk areas, is there some way to decide that we as an organization can live with certain risks in order to free up your people to do some of this more regular systematic auditing? I know that my capacity to live with risk is probably greater maybe than some, but, and we would have to have a good rationale because we're a public entity and a public body. But, if I decide, I'll take, for example, that it's okay to live with the risks associated with our hard copy expense reports, not because that's a good thing at all. And it's ridiculous that in 2021, we're still doing hard copy expense reports, but we're not an organization that travels much, right? So I would feel comfortable saying, you don't have to audit that every year. That can be off the red list, or if it's on the red list, we keep it on the red list with an asterisk that says this is a risk we're willing to live with in order to free up audit to conduct its more important function, really, is to be periodically and systematically checking out the entire operation of the organization. So those are two thoughts I have about this, but I think the goal of getting to regular cycle audits needs to be where we're focusing and what we're heading, what our priority is, because I think that's really what we count on your operation to provide us. Now, people who know more than me, what do you guys have to say?
So Kevin, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the numbers. So today, all in, there's 7 folks in a department when you count Carolyn Edwards as well, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So the proposal, the all-in one would be, you would go to 15 in the department. So increase of 8, and then it would be an increase of 6 and an increase of 5.
Carolyn Edwards is not listed in what I did here. This was just for the audit staff.
Correct.
Okay.
So it would be 6.
The other Carolyn, Greg, the administrative person, not our Carolyn.
Oh, were you thinking about me?
No, I was talking about the
Oh, okay.
the
Okay, no.
assistant.
Oh, okay, sorry. You did.
Yes. So there's 6 audit professionals currently in the department.
Right.
Okay. So you'll be going, so the option C would add 6 people to the department,
That's correct. 6 audit
Option.
professionals, yes.
and then option B audits adds 7, and option A adds 9.
That's correct.
Okay. And does your cost include computers, training, equipment?
It does not. That's just salary and benefits.
So there's some another couple $100,000 probably that needs to come on top of that, but
Yeah, currently our non-personnel budget is, like you said, around 100,000, and that does include dollars for co-sourcing or outsourcing, like we did for the this year for the IT engagement.
And this does not include IT audit capacity?
The staffing does, but the schedule, the IT will have its own risk assessment and its own risk-based cycle audit schedule. And
So
we'll
they're
be seeing that.
in the chart of red boxes that keeps me up at night. Right now.
Sorry.
IT is not in the current audit plan where we have the high risk in red.
Correct. I have a separate IT risk assessment that will be coming to the committee in August, and it also includes a risk-based cycle on a 3-year basis.
Okay.
And me looking at this, it definitely seems that there is a staffing need. You just don't want to be in a situation where you're putting out fires. Number one, your staff will burn out. Plus, you want to be on a regular rotation. Being new to the committee, I think I need to look at this a little closer, but I'm not sure if I heard a lot about budget concerns, but whether or not there's money in the budget and even adding staff to this extent, how you could trickle them in. But looking under, I see a need because I had some discussions with Ms. Smith before that she just needs more people to do the work, to get them on a rotation. In some situations, you could possibly reduce the risk. Hopefully, like in 2 or 3 years, if you come there enough and implement policies and procedures, make them change, hoping you reduce the risk, and then be on an even keel with everyone, and then put out fires.
Right.
Yeah, I would certainly hope that with the additional resources and being able to go out and actually work more closely with the administration, such as we are doing in the HR area, I would expect to see, those areas decreasing over time, so they could get to a every other year basis, or even in a 3-year rotation cycle. So that is, for me, it will be the goal.
Carolyn, thinking about bringing this forward to the entire board, in addition to this information, which I think is really helpful, it would also be helpful, I think, to have some sort of a depiction or framework or some easily digestible chart or information that could show us what you're not getting to. What segments of the organization have you not done a cycle audit on in 5 years or 3, whatever it would be? Because that's the part I think I'm starting to understand. I mean, I understand you have this audit universe, right? That's all the topics. And then we've got, that's allocated to, I guess, red, yellow, or green.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems to me, if I understand where we are right now, there's substantial segments of our organization that you don't get to look at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, time since last audit, a chart like that, or something that would show that the current staffing is not really giving us the benefit of what an Office of Internal Audit should be giving us, which is some sense that our ducks are in a row on some, reliable basis. Obviously you can't be 100% sure because it's a cycle, but we're kind of running blind now is how I feel about certain things. And I don't know whether that's something I should feel concerned about, or if that's fairly typical, or, I wouldn't mind getting calibrated from our committee members about whether I'm overreacting or underreacting to that.
Well, I definitely, I agree with Colin. I felt this way for a while. The department certainly is under-resourced in order to get at the risk areas on a regular cadence, even if it was 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years, 2 for high, 3 for medium, 4 for low. There's still a need for quite a few folks to get that job done. But I agree with you, Co-Chair Beckley, that there are areas we've not looked at in 6+ years that are high risk.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I think is really in addition to what you have, because I love what you have, but I just feel like that tells the rest of the story.
Well, I think being fair to Carolyn's team too, they need some level of unallocated time, because you're always asked to do something that comes up, either I don't want to call it a firefight, but there's always a special need for review or assistance. And I think that's healthy. And typically you would see departments that have anywhere from 10% to 15, maybe even 20% of their time unallocated, because there's always evolving risk, and you need to be able to move at the speed of risk to help the organization.
Is that in those numbers, Kevin? Because I know that's in your annual plan. You usually have a reserve.
We did. We calculated new staff at 67% productivity. So we had a slot for admin and a very small slot for projects, and then a little bit for reserve.
Okay, so these numbers do take that into account to some extent.
To some extent, yeah. Not to the 20%, but to some extent, yes.
Kevin, in years prior, when we've submitted requests for additional staffing for the department to the Board of Education, was this level of detail included in that proposal? So essentially what I'm asking, when we were not given the opportunity to bring on other staff members, were you justifying it like this, or how was it being justified to the board when they were essentially telling us no in the past?
I'll let Carolyn take that.
I can address that. In the past, I want to say possibly in 2013, towards the end of 2013, there was a board retreat, and I did prepare something very similar to this. And actually the number was 12 that I kind of landed on in order to be able to do risk-based rotational audits. That did pass through audit committee, and that recommendation did go to the board, but the legislation that was prepared to go to the board was not added to the agenda by an oversight. And at that point, I decided if I was going to be staffed at the current level, that possibly the way to go to be able to get more work done, the number of staff that I had, was to redesign the office and update the requirements to be in the office. So that's what I did in 2014. And for the most part, I had lived with this staffing, asking for an additional person here and there. And that brought us from 4 to 6 over the 11 years that I have been here. So I don't know if that addresses your question, Mr. Ragland, but in the past, once before, I did, take something like this forward to the audit committee, and they agreed that additional resources were needed, and they agreed, I'm almost sure the number was 12. And it just did not move forward.
Okay. No, that does help me. And I think that it's a lot of this, I believe, is going to make a lot of good sense to board members in explaining it in this fashion. I appreciate the way that it was presented to us here today. No, it does answer my question. Thank you. I also agree. Those we've got to, Madam Co-Chair, those blind spots. That kind of pricked my heart a little bit. So you won't be the only one losing sleep at night over them. So I think we do need to make sure that we're figuring out a way to at least get those on our radar.
Okay, and we can definitely, I mean, we have the information as far as the last time that we've been able to audit areas, and then the areas that have not been audited, almost anything that's in the low risk and the lower tail of the moderate risk probably have not been audited since I've been with the district.
Yeah, so I think that chart would be really, and as stunning as we can make it.
Yeah, and Carolyn, do you have any other data points for the size of other districts for comparison's sake that could be useful in helping make the business case?
Yep.
Yes. Some of them will be helpful, some of them, because every district is so different. There are some districts that require by law that every school has to be audited. There are some districts kind of like us that are pretty comparable in size, but for whatever reason, you know, you might have a staff of 3, you know, but I can get that information and probably hopefully add some context behind what you're saying.
Yeah, and I don't think you should limit it to school districts, because I think that's the folly of a lot of this. This is my soapbox, but you know, this is $1.5 billion organization that's probably more analogous to a hospital, especially a public hospital or something that, you know, and what's their audit like, you know, what if you did a per capita auditor analysis of OSU's Wexner Medical Center or even the university, you know, I think that, you know, what does it take them to feel like they've got a handle on their risk?
Yeah, and some of the challenges there too are it's comparison. So for Ohio Health, I knew the former chief compliance officer very well, Jessica Quinn, and internal audit reported Jessica, but internal audit maybe had 8 people in a department, but they had a huge compliance department that did a lot of the other operational revenue testing, HRSA requirements, Medicare, Medicaid, all those activities. So, which the district does not have a large compliance department. So by default, a lot of the activity falls to Carolyn's team.
And is that something that we should look at? You know, should we have a compliance? Do we have a compliance department at all?
Legal, I believe, has a component of compliance, and I don't know if Mr. Barnes is still on the line or not, but there is a component of compliance in the legal department.
But I mean, you know, like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, we do have a compliance office in legal, but it's limited to anti-discrimination, harassment, Section 504 ADA matters.
So, I mean, I wonder if part of our meeting, when we talk, the 4 of us, we talk about that function as well. And, you know, we try to put our heads together about that. And, you know, to Greg's point that other organizations have compliance and audit, and they're 2 separate. I was actually picking up on that when I was nosing around I was trying to figure some stuff out. I was like, oh, other people have this compliance department. So let's put that on our agenda, because if part of what this exercise is, in addition to getting Carolyn and her team right-sized, it seems to me there's been a lot of other stuff hovering about, like the interface of, you know, how we handle investigations and when does general counsel be called in, should they be called in, and now we've got this compliance thing. I mean, it seems to me, and I suppose we have this new chief of operations coming. this might be a good time to try to look at all of that organizationally for us and get it right going forward.
Okay, so to move this forward, I can get that additional information. Now, Chair and Vice Chair, do you want that to come back to the committee or just from that point uh, to the board, or what's your pleasure?
No, I think it would be appropriate to have that discussion here before the committee.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind to give our committee members a little time to think this over, because sometimes it
Yeah.
takes a day or two for it to percolate before something else comes to mind. And especially if anyone has any thoughts about people we could talk to in other organizations that have compliance versus and/or audit, and how they allocate that work.
And we can share this information on the screen with the committee, so that's not a
Yeah,
problem.
please
That
do.
would be appropriate. Yes, absolutely.
And then
Your expectation, yeah, what would be your expectation as far as staffing up, the staff up time? I mean, I know you talked about, you're not bringing them in all at one time, but what's your timeline in terms of that staffing increase?
My ideal situation would be definitely the when I say two segment managers, that will be an additional segment manager for 4 people in 2022. Because I'm really banking on those 4 individuals to help my current staff be able to get out and to do those follow-ups and to be able to start closing some of those issues. And then I'm also wanting to already have an audit plan for the IT position. So all I have to do is just be able to bring that person on board, and they can start that work. And that will allow me to take that segment from one of my existing segment managers who already has a heavy lift when you consider they also had transportation and they also have food service. And then I have also asked them to take IT. So my ideally for 2022, I would like to be able to bring on sometime throughout the year the IT position, the risk and compliance, and really the compliance because of the ESSER funds. I really want us to be a success story of how you can spend those funds responsibly and transparently versus anything other than, oh, well, we went into Columbus and they weren't doing this, they weren't doing that. We can be proactive, and we can be the example that other school districts throughout the nation can follow. And then the other 2 positions I would like to be able to get boarded this year would be the segment managers, one for operations and then one for academics, because right now I have one person who was the segment manager for academics and accountability. So that would be my ideal situation in 2022.
One other quick question, and this would be a good thing when you're out sort of doing your research about other organizations. What's the standard for direct reports? Is it 5 to 1, which I think is what this would be, right? At 15, no, it would be less, right? Because it would be 12, 4 to 1, or is there some rule of thumb about how many people are reporting to a manager, sort of thing?
I can share what my thinking was. For those of you who know, internal audit, and for those of you who don't, there's a lot of detailed work that goes on. So right now, I have one person who is detail reviewing the work of 3 people, sometimes 4. And sometimes those 4 individuals might have 2 engagements that they're doing. So to not overburden and to really be able to have a thorough level of review, I'm trying to have the leadership team have no more than 3, maybe 4 people who they are directly supervising, keeping in mind the level of detail review, and that these individuals sometimes are running 2 and maybe 3 jobs, but at the most, they're running like 2 engagements simultaneously. So I have one internal audit director who might be getting, detailed work to review from 3 or 4 jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is at all, and that you just persuaded me. I kind of got a little broke out into a sweat just thinking about it. But I know that when we bring it to the board, they're going to say, should there be a flatter structure? And it would just be good to have an answer to that one way or another based on, I mean, I think part of what I just heard there is everybody's so overworked that the managers can't keep up with our overworked audit, on the ground audits because they're being, it's just too much coming in. And that may be the answer, but I just feel like if we could say, well, this is typical in the industry, or this is typical, but whatever, that would be a good thing to have ahead of time.
Okay, and we can prepare that, but that was my thinking on those lines. I'm sorry, Mr. Grant, I didn't mean to talk over you.
This is a more of a practical question, because I know you mentioned that you wanted to get started in fiscal year 2022. That fiscal year begins next week. So I know procedurally, budgets usually get established, a lot earlier than that. So I don't know if that's practical or not to be able to, get that increase starting in fiscal year 22 if budgets have already been determined for fiscal year.
Well, the budget does allow for 2 additional staff to join the Office of Internal Audit for FY22. What's not in is the additional that we've just talked about. So there's already the preparation for the IT position and for one of the academic segment manager. There's already in the district budget for that. What's not there is, of course, the additional segment manager and the risk and compliance in those positions. And that's why, I am definitely sensitive to that and definitely understand that everything's not going to happen, this year. But I did, it's a good conversation, and I have had it before, and I'm glad that we're having it again. But this is really what it will take to do the risk-based cycle audits.
Okay.
But you'll be going from 6 to 8 in fiscal 22 just based upon the budget. So then the ask would be to go from 8 to 4, 5, 6.
Let's say either 13 or 12.
Well, yeah,
Mhm,
8 to 12, so another 4.
correct. Okay. Kevin, you can quit sharing your screen if you don't mind.
If the committee would indulge me for another couple of minutes here, we do, you mentioned that the fiscal year does begin next week. We do have the audit plan that I'd like for Madam Auditor to go through relatively quickly. The last 2 items that are really on the agenda, that and the dashboard, I do think that if you would allow me to extend us until say 5:45, I would appreciate that. If any of you have to absolutely leave at this time, please feel free to do so. But I do want to allow for these other 2 items to be discussed, and then we could adjourn right at 5:45 if that is the will of the committee. Seeing no unreadiness, thank you, Madam Auditor. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And this I think, will be relatively quick because we've had the very detailed conversation about the risk matrix, and this just basically presents the work plan in a much more aesthetically pleasing document. So just bear with me as I figure out how to share my screen. Okay. Okay, hopefully you all can see, and I'm going to just shrink this down to 100%. Hopefully you can see this document here. As I said, there's really, to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing new that the committee has not seen before this meeting. So if I'm going too fast, by all means, slow me down. But this is more of a report that will be on our website once it is approved by the board. So this is what I say, the recommendation comes from the committee to approve our work plan, and then there is actually legislation that does go to the board to adopt that work plan. So this is just a letter from me to the readers about the year that we just went through, and basically thanking all those who were involved in assisting us in completing the work plan. Okay. Our mission and our principle and our vision has not changed in years, so there's nothing new here. Just a nice picture of, I believe, East High School. I do go over the audit authority where we established in the year 2000 by the Board of Education. I briefly go over our current audit resources with the current staffing of 6 auditors and Mrs. Edwards. And then I just go over the certifications of the department. I talk about the services that we offer, assurance audit services. We just started doing consulting services, and we have always done monitoring or follow-up services. I go over the hours that are allocated to this year's work plan. And you can kind of see the graph shows the breakdown of administrative time, project time, which are non-audit projects, audit projects, and then the reserve. I go over how we developed our work plan. It is a risk-based approach. And with every organization, there's going to be limits to what we can accomplish. We cannot do 100% audit coverage. So as we have just discussed right now, we are really focused on the high risk, but hopefully we will get to that cycle-based high risk audit approach. And we talk about flexibility, being able to have a set of hours that we can respond to any type of changing in the risk landscape or any type of special review that needs to be taken. And these next 3 pages go over the audit universe, which we have talked about quite a bit during this meeting. You can just kind of see we have it broken down we try to have it broken down and to be closely aligned to the superintendent's table of organization. So you might see some changes from last year, you might see some changes moving forward, but we have the academics, we have accountability, administrative services, which includes IT, budget, business and operations, communication, engagement, and then the newly formed Department of Equity. And then we have human resources, transformation and leadership, and then the treasurer's office. And then we go into the risk factors and the weighting for each of the audit universes and how we arrive at the risks that are assigned. So you can see for control design and effectiveness, that's our heaviest weighted item, and that's 25% of the consideration. Then it breaks down financial impact and reporting, 20%. Changes in people or processes or regulatory requirements gets 15%. Impact of fraud, waste, and abuse, 15%. The complexity or the velocity of transactions, 10%. All the way down to prior year comments at 5%. And once again, you'll see the pie chart that shows the current residual risk rating, which I do suspect with the effort that we're going to put into doing the follow-ups will change next year. You'll see a pie chart that probably has more of the low and the high risk being equal, with the bulk of it still being in the moderate risk. Then we go over the definition of the residual risk. We go over the audit selection process. And I do just want to highlight that we really considered COVID-19 as it impacted 2020 and as it will continue to impact 2021 and 2022. Because we do know COVID is still amongst us. So what you're really interested in are the actual audit jobs. So we're looking to do school audits. We're looking to do an audit over academic grade reporting. We are looking to do an audit in student attendance. And we're looking to do some type of school audit regarding Chromebook accountability. We talked about the changes in the controller position. So that's what kind of why we want to do an audit in the general ledger and financial reporting area. And because of the emphasis that the district goals and guardrails is going to have on relying on data, we would like to do some type of data validations. And then once again, buildings and grounds, very heavily COVID related. We want to get in, be able to go out and do some school readiness, some building readiness before school starts and also throughout the year.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
Yes.
You go back to 5. Maybe it was 4. No, yeah, 5 was 1. Now, so one of your factors is that when there's a major change in personnel, and clearly we've had in that world, are there any other things driving that as a high risk, or is it high risk just because of that being such a significant change?
There are some other things that are leading to this being high risk, because there are other areas where there have been changes in personnel, but they haven't risen to the level of being high risk. But in this area, they're considering the level of the person who has left and their responsibilities, and the fact that right now the position still is, I know it's being shared by 3 additional people, but we still felt it'd be prudent to go in and to do an audit in this area.
Okay, and so I guess in my mind, I agree with that, the prudence to kick the tires on that, because I guess, and I suppose then there's a necessary corollary that it's high risk. I just, I feel like it's something to keep your eye on, but it doesn't, in my like common person vernacular, I'm not sure that it's high risk. And I guess I kind of feel the same way about data governance, like, especially because the change in personnel is only a 15% factor, right?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time trying to cut this up, but can you repeat what you said about the personnel?
Well, when I looked at your percentages allocated to each category of what goes into deciding the risk rating, I thought change in personnel was only 15%. Maybe I I didn't see that correctly.
No, that's correct.
I think you did, but this is also an area where prior to, I'm hearing a feedback.
Change in personnel.
There's also some issues with the effectiveness of the control design. It's the area where.
So there's other things going into it then.
Correct.
That already existed to increase its risk.
Correct. And what we are expecting to see is once we go in and actually test the procedure manuals that I know that they have worked with an outside CPA firm to put together for them, that should decrease the high risk associated to the control effectiveness and design.
So it could put to bed pretty quickly.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I just have one broad question on the overall risk assessment. We don't need to solve it today. My question was just where you have areas designated as high risk. Does management agree that they're also a high risk area, or are there any areas of disagreement with management as to the level of risk?
We had after we met with the committee, we did go to the senior superintendent's cabinet, which is all the chiefs and so on. And there was a good conversation. The conversation really wasn't disagreement as far as the identification of high risk. It was the timing of coming in and doing some audits, given that there's going to be new personnel starting next year. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
And well, there's more I can share with that. We're also going to be circling back with another department that wants us to come in and go over, the process of how we're doing our risk matrix. So we'll be happy to do that. And then Chair Beckley, did you have a question on the data governance?
No, I think I like that you're looking at it I'm concerned that it's identified as a risk area before they even had a chance to misstep, but so I don't know how to navigate that back and forth, because this is sort of like the problem with, this is the first time they're doing all of that. And to be identified as a risk area before they're even out of the blocks might be a little demoralizing, but I don't know. I mean, believe me, I want that data kicked, the tires kicked on that data big time. So like, I'm hesitant to say anything other than I'm just trying to figure out what's fair.
No, I think in that context, I do believe our language helps with that. How we perceive kind of jumping the gun on that, in what we perceive to be the positive benefits of doing so. We should be articulating that from our perspective. I think they need to know that you care deeply about data and how we're doing with it. We do want to make sure, and the board has already articulated that this is a huge piece of this goals and guardrails for us, and so much so that we spend a lot of time speaking about data and the frequency with which we're going to be getting it reported back out to us. And so having us change the culture so that we're in advance, helpful in making sure that we're efficient moving forward with it. I think that's appropriate, but I hear you when you say that. I think they would benefit from hearing us tell them everything that we've been trying to tell them, for the last year since we've gotten on with
Please
this.
understand that this is more of an indication of how dead serious we are about changing
Right.
culture than any concern about. Yes, I agree.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Board members, the other committee members, and Mr. Daniel, we're finishing up a year-long process that shouldn't have been a year-long, but of changing, radically changing how the board monitors performance. And the euphemism or the short-term terminology is goals and guardrails, but in 30 seconds or less, we're identifying 3 top-level goals, and we have all interim measures for 5 years out, and
Yep.
interim measures that are throughout each year. So there's so that we can monitor and make sure we're on track to achieving those goals at the 5-year mark. And then the guardrails are really our values, and they're the what the superintendent must do in terms of honoring the whole child, allocating resources equitably, some of those sort of softer things that go into facilitating their ability to meet the goals, but also are a reflection of the community's values. And in theory, what we're going to be doing is managing the heck out of these things and getting out of the way for everything else.
And just if I could add to that very quickly, we do come back and we get a report out on data governance from the Office of Internal Audit. I think it would be prudent for us to have sort of a comprehensive review of the process itself and how we came to all of that too. And so I think it would be good to have someone from the administration come in and maybe even the superintendent herself, and then talk about some of that stuff. So yeah, please continue, Madam Auditor. We are way over my time with the committee, and I do not want them wrangling me for keeping them over any more than what they said they would.
We are almost done. Number 9 is our normal audit plan development, with the process that we are going through actually right now. And number 10, the engagements 10 through 17 are basically, as I said, we're going to be really focused on following up and hopefully being able to close some of these open issues. So we just kind of identify, where we see ourselves going. And then the last page here is just the status of the year that will be finishing June 30th. And we completed every engagement except for the talent acquisition and recruitment, which the board and the committee did approve for us to remove. And that is the work plan. So I know it's rushed and I apologize, but if at all possible, I would like to have a vote to move forward with this work plan basically going to the board. And the work plan will just be of the job that we are planning to do in the upcoming year.
Certainly. So members of the committee, is there any unreadiness regarding the work plan? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the work plan for submission to the Board of Education.
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I got a second from Mr. Jordan, a motion from Madam Co-Chair. Madam Auditor, please call the roll.
Mr. Grant,
Yes.
Mr. Vajon,
Yes.
Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
Chair Ragland,
Yes,
Vice Chair Beckerly,
Yes.
and that motion carries.
thank you, ma'am.
And that completes my report.
Thank you.
All right. Let me see. We do have the dashboard on the agenda.
That can wait. If any of the committee members have questions over what's in the dashboard, by all means, feel free to contact me, but it's just the same format as normal.
Certainly. All right. With that, committee, thank you so much for indulging me for the added time on the agenda tonight. If there's no other questions or concerns, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I got a second from Mr. Daniel. Madam Auditor, please call the roll.
Okay. Mr. Vajon,
Yes.
Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Daniel,
Yes.
Chair Ragland,
Yes,
Vice Chair Beckerly,
Yes.
and Mr. Grant.
Yes.
Motion carries.
thank you, members of the committee and Madam Auditor and your team. We will communicate with you regarding our change in the date of our August meeting through email. And if there are any other questions around that, please respond to myself, Co-Chair Beckerly, or Madam Auditor regarding that. Thank you, committee. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.